Each day, more and more people are listening to music on Spotify, and that's also true for podcasts. Next time you're on the Spotify app, make sure to follow Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond. Enjoy listening to Lou, his incredible guests, and all of the amazing episodes. Listen, follow, and share. Thrive Loud on Spotify.
Get ready to Thrive Loud with Lou Diamond.
Hey, Thrive Loud listeners, Lou Diamond here. I hope you're doing great. Man, the year is flying by. At least it feels like that on Thrive Loud. I know some people are like, dude, what are you talking about? This is the longest year ever due to COVID-19 and social isolation and all the things that have gone on from late February all the way until now and to what is almost the end of June. Kind of crazy. 4 months. What's happening? Anyway, well, what's happening is on Thrive Loud. Some great episodes this past week. Nick Adams from Differential Ventures, Brian Lydell from Fidens Insurance. Real interesting and in-depth conversations, actually. A lot of fun. Check them out when you get a chance. And definitely enjoy this episode, pulled from Bedside Readings, Authors That Thrive. Karen Treiger. Really interesting story about her family that she wrote about. You're going to like this story, that the research she did and the levels that she went back to really understand the roots of her family, the family she married into, which is pretty incredible. So the story's great. Enjoy it. Here is Karen Treiger on Thrive Loud.
Welcome to Bedside Readings, Authors That Thrive, a podcast show that provides you exclusive access to top writers around the globe and how they are thriving through their writing, their passions, and their lives. Here's your host, Lou Diamond.
Welcome, everyone, to Bedside Readings, Authors That Thrive, connecting you to amazing authors that are thriving through their work and in their lives each and every day. I'm your host, Lou Diamond. Today, we have a former attorney turned author who pulled together the threads of a family story in her widely praised book, My Soul is Filled with Joy, a Holocaust story which chronicles her in-laws' journey through the death camp of Treblinka to a pit in a Polish forest where they hid until their liberation. Listeners, please welcome Karen Treiger.
Thank you. It's so happy to be here. I'm thrilled to be part of this.
So, Karen, share with me, if you can, you were an attorney for quite some time. Was there a calling, a direction, something that said, I'm looking to actually write and share this story? How did the process, I want to first start about you. You had a law practice, and then this decided to change as you wanted to become an author.
Well, it wasn't so much that I wanted to become an author as I wanted to write this book. Okay. Because since I joined the Goldberg family some 35 years ago, and learned the story of my in-laws, I said, this just has to be a book. But there was nobody to write it, and nobody was going to do it. And then they both died, and their story just rested on my heart and in my soul, really. And I just finally said, this is my opportunity. And it was in 2015, and my kids were peeling off to go to college and become adults in the world. And I saw an opportunity for myself to do it. And it was also actually, there was another piece of the puzzle, which was that my father died. Mm-hmm. And it was a very impactful, of course, when a parent dies, it was really sort of what took me to my core and made me ask some difficult questions of myself, like, what do I really want to leave behind when I'm gone? And what haven't I done that I've been dreaming of doing? And this was it. This was my dream, to get Sam and Esther's story out into the world so that their story of resilience and survival wouldn't be lost to the world and to our family, honestly. But then the crazy things happened. Like, I was researching and writing. I spent 3 years doing it, and their story became my story. Mm. And that was the real surprise in the whole process. And I did leave my law practice, which was really, I was practicing law in elder law. And it was a very meaningful and interesting law practice, but I have not looked back. This has been the most rewarding thing I've done besides having children.
Karen, when was the first time you heard their story?
Oh, wow. When I joined the family, it was very clear that my mother-in-law, Esther Goldberg, did not talk about her experience in the Holocaust.
Right.
There are many, many survivors. I have learned subsequently there are many survivors that just will not talk about it. It's too hard. Sam, on the other hand, my father-in-law, was willing to talk about it, and he would actually share stories at the Passover Seder, was the main place that he started sharing, where I started to learn and open my eyes to what really happened. And he would talk about, because in Passover, of course, we celebrate the exodus of the Jews from Egypt, from their Egyptian slavery. And he would talk about his own exodus from the death camp of Treblinka, where he was a slave, where he was a prisoner for 13 months. And so that's when I started to learn the details. And then I started to be able to ask for more information. And slowly but surely, I learned the story, but I didn't learn really the whole story until I started digging myself and going back to Poland and meeting the people who were there, seeing the pit in the forest where they lived, where they hid for a year, seeing Treblinka, just being there and doing the research on the ground as well as in the books. That's when I really was able to fill in the story for both of them.
I wanted to ask the question, obviously, we're not going to give any spoiler alerts for the readers, but we'd love to at least give some shape to how to paint this picture. Were you able to get other contributors and other factors aside from their direct story to help tell their story?
Yes, that's probably why it took me 3 years, I guess, because I did a ton of what I wanted very badly to tell their story in historical context. That was my original goal. I want to tell their story, but not just like a storybook kind of thing. I wanted it to be rooted in the history of the time and of the war in Europe. And so by doing that, I had to interview a lot of people who are still alive, thank goodness. And I had to do a lot of reading and studying. And so every step that I took led me to another discovery and another step. It was one of those, you go down some rabbit hole and you find pathways under the ground that you never imagined were there. And through that, I met people. For example, I met a man who lives in Florida, he's still alive, who was a student it's my mother-in-law's father was a teacher. In Yiddish, it's called a melamed, of young students.
Right.
And his students would come every day, like 6, 7, 8-year-old kids would come every day to his house, and he would teach them. Well, I found this man who was one of his students who had survived the war. And I was able to interview him about what Esther's father was like, what their house was like, what the town was like. And it just opened up a huge amount of information that I could never have dreamed of getting before.
I want to ask 2 questions, and I'll do them sequentially in order. What was it like physically being at both the death camp and in the forest for you as you were doing this research?
Oh, wow. Yeah, it was life-changing dramatically for me. The death camp, actually, I write about this in the very beginning. This is not a spoiler to listeners. I break the book up into 2 parts. The first half is Sam and Esther's story, and the second half is my story. And I begin my story at Treblinka and what I felt there and what I didn't feel there, because it was destroyed by the Nazis in November or December of 1943. They tore down everything, all the gas chambers and all the buildings, and they turned it into a farm. So there's nothing there that really reminds us of what was. You have to really use your imagination. And even I, who have a lot of knowledge about it, did a ton of research. It was hard for me to imagine this place as a death camp, murdering people every day in gas chambers. It was really hard. I felt very empty there. In contrast, at the pit when we found this. So an 88-year-old man who was 9 years old during the war and who was the son of one of the families that helped them when they were in hiding. He was in charge of taking them food every day in a pail and leaving it by the pit. So at night they would come out and get some nourishment to sustain themselves. And he was the one who walked us through the forest and knew exactly where to go and showed us this hole in the ground. He said, this is the pit that they lived in. And it was that moment that changed my life pretty dramatically. As I stared into that pit and thinking about Sam and Esther, like who I knew and loved, being in that pit for a year in the woods, my whole body was shuddering, honestly. But what I realized at that moment was that I take too much in my life for granted. And I decided to live my life differently, with much more gratitude and much more trying to be, not that I was an unkind person, I wasn't, but I wanted to be more aware of being kind to others, because they survived because of the kindness of others. And the world is a much better place if we live it in gratitude and with kindness. And I just made that sort of really dramatically more part of my life. And that's been huge for me, really huge and really wonderful.
It's interesting, Karen, because you mentioned the dichotomy, obviously, Holocaust survivors. You're right. There are two camps, those that talk about it and those who don't. And obviously, there are those who have a feeling of hatred when you experience what you did, having to go visit these places and realize where there wasn't kindness. And there are those that maybe have more of a bigger appreciation of the moment. Question I have for you here is, would you have ever expected this to happen to you, having such a transformative experience? And when did the idea of what the story would be change from telling their story versus, as you described it, their story and your story?
I think that I can pinpoint the moment in time when that changed. And I realized this was much bigger story than just Sam and Esther's story, which is big enough. Like, don't get me wrong. It's a big enough story. But there was a moment in time. It was this moment. I knew right away that I had to go to Poland on a trip to Poland to do this in order to write this book. I had to go to Poland. So, but I knew about Helena Stish, who was one of the righteous Gentiles, righteous Christians who helped Sam and Esther during that time. There were two Stish families who lived next to each other, but I only knew about Helena. And I just wanted to try to figure out where she lived, kind of just to go there and take a picture, thinking that if I was lucky, I would just take a picture outside her house and move on to the next, tourist event that I was doing for myself, that it would be more like a tourist thing kind of thing. And I called my sister-in-law, my husband's older sister, Faye, who was actually born in Poland in 1945. And I asked her if she knew where Helena lived, if she had any idea how to contact that family. And she said, I have no idea. Forget it. Nobody knows. Forget that idea. Okay. I said to myself, this avenue is not good, but I'm going to keep trying. So, but then 2 weeks later, she called me back and she said, Karen, I have these letters that I found in my father's apartment when he died. I've saved them all these years, but I don't know who they're from or what they say because they're in Polish. Would you like me to send them to you? That was the moment I knew something big had changed, because I knew that those letters were going to lead me on a journey that I couldn't have imagined. And in fact, they did. I had them translated from my now wonderful friend, Joanna Milik, who's a woman from Warsaw who lives here in Seattle. And that led me to the entire Stish family, to being able to go there, meet them all, see the houses, see the pit, do the whole story unfolded in big time part because of that moment in time. Wow.
Fascinating and great to just hear how in depth you got. I was going to ask this question. This is the family that you married into, and this is your husband's family. Can you share, I guess, what was his reaction to some of the learnings or even the book itself as you pulled it all together? Obviously, such a strong connection between the two of you, but you being even more connected to his family.
Oh, when you're a child of Holocaust survivor, life is complicated, and your parents' story is hard for you. And I would say that my husband, Shlomo, Sheldon, he goes by it in his professional life, Sheldon Goldberg, but we call him Shlomo, his Hebrew name. He's really grateful that I wrote the book and that I did the research. And he's really happy he actually went on the trip to Poland, which at first he didn't feel he should go because his parents had told him that he should never go back to Poland. And so he didn't think he should go. But then once everything unfolded and it became clear that we were not only going to go to his hometown of his parents, but meet the entire Stish family, he decided to go. So retracing the footsteps of his parents, both himself personally and me, doing all this research on it, there have been some challenging moments because there were some secrets in the family that came out, like when you dig, you find stuff, and some things that were unknown before or known like a little bit, but not talked about, came out in stark contrast and stark relief in my research. And I put them in the book. And that was hard, I think, for all of the children to have some of the family things that were family secrets, at least in their family, to be put into a book. I think that's hard. So even though there are hard parts to it, he's extremely grateful and happy that I wrote the book and that he was able to be part of it. In fact, I asked him to write the epilogue in the book. And his voice is in the book as well. And I actually asked all of my children, all 4 of our children, plus my son-in-law who was with us on the trip, to write short thoughts about the trip for them and what it meant for them. So like you have the voice of the next generation, and that's just at the end of the book in an appendix. And every time if I reread them, I just cry. It's just so beautiful. I just love it.
2 last questions here, Karen, because you provided us a lot of information. One, has this writing experience inspired you to continue doing more writing?
Oh, yes. It inspired me. It is. So one of the messages that I leave with audiences is about family and about looking into your family, because I looked in, as you said, I looked into my husband's family, not my blood family. It's the one I joined by marriage. But we all have families. Our families all have stories. And I think we should take the opportunity while there are still people alive, if there are, hopefully, to ask them the questions and do the talking to them and do some research while you have the opportunity. And so I decided to take my own advice, and my current project is researching, and hopefully I'll be publishing a book about my own family's history, which is very different. It's not a Holocaust story. It's a Seattle pioneer story, but it's wonderful. And the research I've been doing has been fantastically fun.
Karen, I'm going to end with the beginning here. The title, My Soul is Filled with Joy. I'm assuming that's your soul.
Oh, we'll need a half an hour for this answer, but I'll try to do it in 60 seconds.
Okay.
That was not, yes, it is my soul, but those words didn't come out of my mouth. Those words came out of the mouth of Grzegorz Malashevsky, who is the grandson of one of the Stish families that helped Sam and Esther when they were in hiding. He was the first contact I had in Poland, and we talked for an hour the very first time, like on an iPhone, like FaceTime. And we talked, and I had a translator, obviously. And at the end of the hour, he didn't know so much. He knew his grandparents had helped some Jews during the war, but he didn't know the whole stories. His parents both died when he was young, so he didn't really know. So when we finished this hour-long conversation, and I gave him a ton of information, at least stuff that I knew at that time, he just was speechless and just looked into the phone. He's in Poland. He was looking into the phone and he just said, "My heart is full and my soul is filled with joy."
It's great.
And that's how I got the title.
Excellent. Although I bet it probably ended a little differently in the end. Very, very cool. Karen, thank you for sharing this with the world. And thank you for sharing a little bit of a message behind the story here on Bedside Readings, Authors That Thrive. Really appreciated you coming on. I knew our listeners would like this as much as I did. I know they will. And hopefully you had fun while you were here too.
Thank you. This was a wonderful time. I really appreciate the opportunity.
And to all our listeners out there, keep thriving onward and upward. And remember, be brief, be bright, be gone.
Thank you for listening to Authors That Thrive, brought to you by Bedside Reading. To learn more about today's guest, head on over to bedsidereading.com. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcasts, or follow us everywhere on social media at Bedside Reading.
You've been listening to Thrive Loud with your host, Lou Diamond. Check us out on the web at thriveloud.com. Follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube at Thrive Loud. Check us out on the Good Pods app at Thrive Loud, where you can follow, listen, and connect directly to Lou and all of the Thrive Loud episodes. Thanks for listening.